8th UMD Environmental Justice and Health Disparities Symposium. My name is Dr. Sacoby Wilson. I'm really happy and excited to be leading this show as I've done for the last 7 symposia. Just to introduce myself a little bit, I'm a professor in the School of Public Health with the Maryland Institute for Applied Environmental Health. I also direct the Environmental Economic Justice Lab, the EJ Lab. I'm also director for the Center for Community Engagement and Environmental Health, SIEGE. And just to talk about SIEGE's mission for a little bit, SIEGE is a group that really focuses on empowerment science and liberation science, making sure that communities that are frontline fence line communities that are impacted by environmental, climate, energy injustices get the technical assistance and research support that they need. Empowerment science is making sure that everybody who's on the front line of these issues, that they're contextual experts and they got the capacity, they get the capacity to really address the problems with scientific tools and resources. So anybody could be a scientist, and folks are on the front line dealing with these issues are the primary contextual experts. So community science is really important. And liberation science is the idea of liberating people from toxicants, from sacrifice zones, from dirty fossil fuel infrastructure, right? And so this is what we do in Siege. And since the last symposium, which was last year, of course, there's been a lot of new development in Siege, and I'll talk about those later on. But we gotten some new funding. We started a new summer scholars program. We're going to launch a climate fellows program. We're going to launch with one of my colleagues in journalism, Dr. Vasudevan, Christian Vasudevan. We're going to launch a Citizens Journalism Institute, so folks can learn how to use journalism tools who are on the front line to tell their own stories to impact these issues, right? We also are doing work to do our own podcast with WYPR. So we have a new EJ podcast. You haven't heard it, check it out. So we're trying to get out the word about EJ issues and give people the tools that they can use, right, to impact those issues. And that podcast is called My Block Counts. So what you can do in your block to make your block count. Okay. So we got a lot of activity and things that we've been doing since the last symposium. And you think about why this eighth symposium is so relevant. You think about the impacts of climate change across the country, forest fires in the West. You go beyond our country, right, and look at fires in Europe. You look at issues of flooding. We just had flooding in College Park area last night. You look at issues of heat waves, the health for the poor and the elderly, and the fact that our Gulf Coast brothers and sisters are dealing with, hurricanes, dealing with heat waves, and we're still dealing with COVID. And you have a lot of folks who are dealing with other climate-related perturbations. And then in a long history of environmental injustices in many communities across this country, right? And think about it. Get it to our theme of this symposium is energy versus power, right? Visions for the future. So a lot of our environmental justice issues were actually energy justice issues. It's the legacy of dirty fossil fuel infrastructure, which we know is disproportionately in communities of color, disproportionately in low wealth communities. You can't talk about addressing climate change without talking about addressing energy injustice. You can't talk about addressing energy injustice without talking about addressing racism, right? Why did I mention racism? Because think about how the disproportionate burden of fossil fuel infrastructure across the life cycle of fossil fuels in communities of color, from extraction, right, to transport, our indigenous brothers and sisters, to processing. We're going to hear from folks on the Gulf Coast dealing with Cancer Alley, over the 3 days, right? And so what they're dealing with when it comes to petrochemical operations. We're going to have a 5-year anniversary session of Hurricane Maria, right? But then the 5-year anniversary discussion about Hurricane Harvey and the Houston Ship Channel. Then you think about combustion byproducts. We're going to talk about transportation and equity, but some of the disproportionate impacts of transportation on communities of color, on low wealth communities, right? Highways and byways built on purpose through their communities, highways to nowhere, right? And the fact that the traffic-related air pollution is a major driver of poor health outcomes, from asthma to cancer to heart disease, right? And so if you look at combustion of fossil fuels, if you look at that infrastructure, these are the communities, the frontline fence line communities that are most impacted. So you got to connect environmental injustice to energy injustice to climate injustice. And that's why this event, this symposium is so relevant right today. You also have to think about the issues of COVID-19. We're still in the pandemic. And what communities have been disproportionately impacted by COVID, right? Communities of color, low wealth communities. And then think about the connection between air pollution and COVID. You know, SARS-CoV-2 sees folks who live in areas with air pollution who have underlying health issues as easy targets. If you have a hot spot for mobile and stationary sources of air pollution, if you're dealing with the cumulative impacts of air pollution, you are an area that's going to be at risk for having more COVID impacts. You are an area going to be more at risk for urban heat islands. You are areas going to be more at risk for dealing with chemical stressors. So you have to look at the intersection of heat, right? The intersection of chemical stressors, right? Like particulate matter, with the intersection of biological stress like SARS-CoV-2, leading to COVID-19. And then you look at this Biden administration with the various executive orders on climate change, like Executive Order 14008, right? That's the part of the Justice 40 initiative. As we move from a dirty energy economy to a clean energy economy, 40% of those benefits should go to disadvantaged communities. That's a powerful construct, but how are we going to make that actually happen? You got to have money, folks. So the infrastructure bill that passed, bipartisan infrastructure bill that passed some months ago, and the recently passed Inflation Reduction Act, with the $400 billion allotted for climate change and $60 billion there for environmental justice. This may be an opportunity to make Justice 40 real for folks, not just pie in the sky, not just fluff and circumstance, but actually real. So this is why this event is important, because of the policy opportunities, because of the resources. And we have to remember, those at the front of the line, those who are at the front line, need to be at the front of the line when it comes to these resources. So if you want to, learn more about, our overall agenda, you can go to www.siege.org/symposium. So we have the updated full session agenda that you can download all the sessions. If you haven't had a chance to see who are all the speakers, we also have a bio document that you can download to get all the bios for all the speakers, including our keynote speakers for the day. Our first keynote of the day, of course, is Dr. Jalonne White-Newsome, who I'll introduce soon. And our second keynote for the day is our lunchtime speaker, Dr. Rhonda Buchanan. And Jalonne is with CEQ. Dr. Buchanan is with Health and Human Services, but I'll get more on that later. We'll be streaming these sessions today via StreamYard. And so you'll be online. For those of you who are attendees, you'll be able to view these sessions via our Siege YouTube channel, and also the plenary sessions for day 1, day 2, and day 3 will be able to be viewed via Facebook Live. So just a little bit more detail, day 1 and day 2 will be virtual, and then day 3 is going to be in person on campus at the STEM Student Union. And so I want to just quickly thank my team who helped with, organize this symposium, and I'll give them more things later on today. But I really want to give a shout out to the sponsors who really allowed us to pull together a great symposium. And without these sponsors, we wouldn't be able to provide the honorarium to our speakers, cover the cost of some of the streaming that we have, cover the cost of the food and the in-person activities that are going to happen on day 3. So we really appreciate the support of the sponsors with this event. And so some of our sponsors include Meta, Bezos Earth Fund, and Yellow Chair Foundation. And these are just not sponsors as it relates to the symposium. This is really sponsors who've been providing support for Siege to grow, to be that resource, to be able to do the empowerment science and the liberation science, to be able to support communities on frontline fence line, to make sure science is actually real and actionable, not doing pain pipping science, not doing colonial science, not doing extractive science, but doing science as other people, for the people, by the people. Science is about real change, social justice, and action. Science is applied. Science that's about engagement, and science that's really driven by the people. So appreciate the support from these funders. Now, specifically for the event, for the symposium, got to give a shout out to EDF, Sierra Club, NAMATE. We'll talk more about NAMATE later, National Wildlife Federation, and thank you, US EPA. Also, shout out to Union Concerned Science for providing support in NRDC. And then we have to give a shout out to some of our co-sponsors of sessions, the Icahn School of Medicine, who are organizing a session related to environmental justice and liberation science. Don't miss that session, because I talked about liberation science before. And the Kresge Foundation, their work around climate equity and health, and really engaging communities who can doing solutions around building equity and climate mitigation, resilience, and adaptation. And also want to give a shout out to our other civil chair sponsors, SRAP, Climate Exchange, Choose Clean Water, School of Public Health. And so with that, I want to transition now to introducing our speaker for this opening keynote. So our speaker for the day is Dr. Jalonne White-Newsome, and she's going to be the opening speaker on our theme of energy versus power, visions for the future. So let me give a little bit of background on Dr. White-Newsome. She is now the Senior Director for Environmental Justice for the White House Council on Environmental Quality. In this role, she advises Chair Mallory on environmental justice policy and helps to advance the Biden-Harris administration's commitment to advance environmental justice, including the implementation of the Justice 40 initiative. She founded and led Empowering a Green Environment and Economy, LLC, a strategic consulting firm. Prior to both of these roles, Dr. White-Newsome was a senior program officer at the Kresge Foundation and created the Climate Resilience and Equitable Water Systems Initiative, the first national grant-making initiative focused at the intersection of climate change and water inequity. She also serves as the first director of the federal policy for WEAC for environmental justice in Washington, D.C., which is actually where I met, not I knew Jalonne before that, but Jalonne was here in D.C. about 10 years ago. And she's also had other roles, but this one other roles in the environmental justice space. She's a member, lifetime member of Delta Sigma Theta Sorority Incorporated, to give a shout out to the Deltas. And she has her PhD in environmental health sciences from the University of Michigan School of Public Health, a master's degree in environmental engineering from Southern Methodist University, and her bachelor's degree in chemical engineering from Northwestern. And just a little bit of personal kind of experience relationship with Jalonne. I've known Jalonne for maybe about 15 years. Jalonne has real deep connections to the Mid-Atlantic, real deep connections to this region, right, in the DC area. Jalonne was actually instrumental in the first symposium. Remember I said we had 8 symposia, right? She was instrumental in the planning of the first symposium way back in 2012, 10 years ago. And at a symposium, Jalonne was one of the co-founders, I think with Mustafa Ali and with me, when we co-founded the first kind of regional coalition, the DMV EJ coalition, right? So Jalonne knows what's the issues in this region. And I think without, some of her support early on, Siege wouldn't be as successful as it is. And the symposia, right, wouldn't be as successful as it is. And we've actually have a second generation of that coalition now called the Mid-Atlantic Justice Coalition. So I want to thank Jalonne for her, contributions to my work, to the success of the center, to the foundation of the symposium. And I'm gonna pass the mic to Jalonne so she can share some knowledge and wisdom and her visions and what she's doing as it relates to energy versus power, and kick us off, Jalonne, for this very important symposium.
Man, Dr. Sacoby, so much. You didn't already given the plenary, opening plenary. So I don't know if I have anything else to say, but again, thank you so much for the kind introduction. And I feel like in many ways, I'm coming back to my second home, because I don't know if you knew before, I lived in Maryland several years, a couple of decades ago, lived in Virginia, and now I'm being reconnected to DC and kind of living and working here. So again, I feel at home. And so just thank you for that. And I look forward to connecting with many of you in this virtual audience that I know call this region the DMV home. But before we go too far, I want to let you know that I'm calling from my offices here in DC on the original lands of the Piscataway peoples. And because I come from a long line of advocates and people servants and educators, I got to acknowledge my ancestors, my grandparents, my parents that are alive, and some that have transitioned to heaven. And just, again, acknowledge that they made it possible for me to do the work that I've been able to engage in, this work that I love for many, many years. So again, I appreciate the opportunity to even be asked to be a part of this symposium. And so, in fact, as you were thinking about it, Dr. Sacoby, I was like, dang, I think I was at the first symposium, the second, maybe even the third. And, So I call it just an immense pleasure to not be just like maybe one of your partners in crimes, but your partner in justice. And so, again, as you talked about, we had an opportunity to initiate the DMV EJ Coalition, which I think started with a couple of people, a couple of phone calls, and that grew into a larger network of folks doing EJ work, wanting to support each other. And I think eventually seeded a lot of what you continue to create and nurture today. So again, I can't not acknowledge Dr. Sacoby, your vision, your advocacy, your realness in this space. And I also can't not acknowledge the other EJ Trailblazers that have been a gift to me in my life that, again, hail from this region. So, again, Mustafa Ali and Leslie Fields, that I think were a part of, again, helping set the foundation for the first symposium. And then I definitely can't, even be it virtually set foot in Maryland, and not acknowledge the vivacious Vernice Miller Travis, who has been a mentor and a guide for many years, and also my colleague, Dr. Andrew Sawyers, which when I worked at the State of Maryland Department of Environment several years ago, he allowed me to support him in his role as Director of Environmental Justice and support the Commission on Environmental Justice and Sustainable Communities at the department. So again, it is wonderful to remember these deep connections, and I have a deep thanks to all of you all. I don't take any of that for granted. So while I have mad love for Maryland and this region, I'm a very proud native Detroiter, which some of you might know. From elementary school on, my love for science and nature and my passion for protecting people is really why I started connecting air pollution and water pollution, not only to plant health, but people health. And so this thing became real to me when I, realized that my West Side neighborhood church, so I grew up in New Bethel Baptist Church, which is the original home, the church that Aretha Franklin grew up in, her father pastored. And so, that West Side neighborhood, unfortunately, and still is one of the highest areas where we have our Black and brown babies being exposed to lead. And so it really became real to me that something is going on. I remember when I would go visit my great aunts on the east side of Detroit, and it seemed like for some reason they had more asthma and breathing problems than my aunts that lived in the suburbs of Detroit. So again, that made it real to me. I remember when I would watch my grandparents when they were living in their 70s and 80s and really struggling to get through the hot summer days. And the fact that in many ways, the systems were failing to protect them and many of the other silver saints in our community, as I call them. And, it was not just the heat, but it was the overburden of energy costs, of having to make these decisions of, do I pay for my medicine or do I pay my electric bill? And again, all this time they were being impacted by the heat stress and really didn't know it. So again, this became real to me. And then just last summer with my parents experiencing, and I think, again, it's unfortunate with the floods that I saw on TV this morning that, again, are hitting Maryland very hard. My parents were part of that state declared emergency flood that happened in Michigan last summer, where it was 8 feet of water in their basement. And in many ways, I feel like there were systems that failed them, and many of the folks on that East Side Detroit community that have suffered repeated trauma over and over from flooding, just because in many ways they live in a formerly redlined neighborhood. So again, it is very real to me. And so my entree into environmental justice isn't something that is an academic pursuit, or I want to publish some papers, or it's a pastime that made me feel good. For me, this work continues to be driven by a necessary passion to protect people that are overlooked, invisible, forgotten. It's a necessary passion to change the policies and systems and institutions that exacerbate the injustice. It's necessary for me to never lose sight of the faces and lives of my family and folks that I care about, that I know and don't know from near and far, that continue to suffer from a health standpoint because of environmental racism across this country. So, in a nutshell, coming from a family of people servants, my orientation has always been you are not in this world for yourself, but to improve this world for somebody else. So, when I received this invitation to spend some time with y'all today, I thought about the theme of the conference pretty hard, Dr. Sacoby: energy versus power, visions for the future. And now I tell you, I was a little bit concerned because I immediately said to myself, energy versus power, should they be pitted against each other? Especially when we need energy in some type of shape or form to power our world. But then I thought about this theme, much to what you alluded to, that it might make sense because we know in this virtual room that the search for energy, especially the extractive processes that pull out the natural resources from the ground and other places, can definitely be pitted against and sometimes seek to defeat the power that is already embodied in many of the communities that have been called and continue to be stewards of the land and resources that we've been granted to take care of. So this tension between energy versus power is real to me, and maybe realer to many of you in this virtual space that have lived near a hydrofracking site, that have been downwind from a coal-fired power plant, or maybe are stones throw away from mountaintop extraction. But as we think about the second part of that theme, visions for the future, I want to invite each of you to consider this question. Instead of thinking about energy versus power, what are the ways that energy can build power? I'm going to say that again. What are the ways that energy can build power? So, in my little mind, it takes six things, six considerations: evolution, nimbleness, environmental justice, responsibility, a generational mindset, and not yielding to the norms. So that's energy, E-N-E-R-G-Y. So we're going to start with the E, which is evolution. So evolution is required to build power. Evolution in advancing technology and how we move towards sources of energy that are renewable and truly clean is important. But along those same lines, we must evolve the way we think about sharing power. As an example, I've had an opportunity to work in private industry as an engineer, nonprofit, state government, academia, philanthropy, and across each of these institutions, it is critical that we evolve the importance of sharing power in decision making. Because until we really respect all of the voices, the data that comes from community and that expertise, again, we will continue to lose sight of the long-term benefits that we all deserve. And so I posit that an evolution in our thinking can give us the energy to build power. The N in energy stands for nimbleness. Our world, as you know, is changing day by day, minute by minute. There is a need to be responsive, not retroactive, creative and not stuck, embrace risk and not be frozen by fear of failure. We need nimbleness in our research methods, in our policy making, and our relationship building. So I posit that nimbleness will give us the energy to build power. The second E stands for environmental justice, and it must be a priority and not an afterthought. For example, there is an automotive facility on the east side of Detroit and a couple of community groups that I was working with. And unfortunately, this facility went forward with making some process changes to actually begin to make EV or electric vehicles, which is a good thing, right? But unfortunately, these process changes resulted in odors and emissions and other nuisances that made the community living close facility sick. And so the importance of having tools like the tools that are created at Siege and other ways to do that EJ analysis, that environmental justice analysis, coupled with community connections to understand and ground truth what's actually happening on the ground is essential. So environmental justice, engagement, relationship building must be a priority in every dimension of our work. And so I posit that environmental justice will give us the energy to build power. The R stands for responsibility. And to me, it goes hand in hand with accountability. And I've witnessed, as I'm sure some of you, the abuse of power not followed with any acknowledgement of the mistake or making any attempts for reconciliation. I am a firm believer, and my grandmother told me we can't get away with sweeping our mistakes and missteps under the rug, particularly when lives are literally on the line. And so the unfortunate example from my personal life is how, again, my parents and the many folks across Detroit were forced to deal with the impacts of that state declared emergency due to flooding last summer. And unfortunately, that burden and causation was placed on my parents and many other families that lost so much, not just the physical stuff, but it impacted their mental health, their physical health. And so when folks don't take responsibility, that's a challenge and it hurts. And so again, as we talk about the energy that it requires to build power, responsibility has to be a part of that formula. The G in energy stands for a generational mindset. Now, we must recognize the generations that will be impacted if we don't build power in a way that is sustainable and life-giving. Since the ages of 6 and 8, my daughters Ari and JJ have been exposed to the fight for basic human rights. Unfortunately, their mama dragged them to climate marches, and they were testifying in front of the EPA when they were very young. And so, if not only for themselves, our babies are fighting for human rights, but it's for their grandparents and those that come after them. So again, taking a generational perspective will give us the energy to build power. The last letter, Y, is simply not yielding to the norms. And most of you and some of you that might know me know that I usually tend to disrupt in a good way, hopefully, where I decide to land. And so not yielding to the norms means not taking the simple path or relying on how we've done it before. Or again, we got to have the courage to stay the course, even when the path is not clear, a little rocky and uncertain. We can't go back to the way we've done it. So as I think about the energy it takes to build power, it's something that is definitely top of mind for me in my new role as Senior Director for Environmental Justice at the Council of Environmental Quality. The evolution of systems, the nimbleness required to meet the challenges of every day, keeping EJ a priority and not an afterthought, being responsible, acknowledging the legacy of environmental injustice, and what we must do to secure the lives and vitality of our future generations. And of course, not yielding to the norms is the energy that I am trying to bring to CEQ, or the Council on Environmental Quality. So for the next couple of moments, I want to share with you a couple of streams of work that Dr. Sacoby alluded to that we are engaged in at CEQ, because I think it's important that we spread the word. You're informed so you can help us do our job better as we look to create a stronger vision for our nation. And so hopefully, oh, thank you so much, Noble, you are on it. I have a couple slides to share, it won't be long. So our work at the Council on Environmental Quality, and I never want to assume that folks know who CEQ is really grounded in the belief that was set forth by the president that every single person deserves to have access to clean water, clean air, and a healthy community. And so the 5 areas that, again, encompass President Biden's agenda are listed here: NEPA, environmental justice, climate change, and clean energy, protecting our lands and waters, and federal sustainability. And so for too long, some of these basic protections we have not delivered on. And that's why this agenda at this time, at this appointed time, is so important. And so I want to take a couple minutes to talk about three initiatives that I definitely want you to be aware of. And the first, as Dr. Sacoby alluded to, is the Justice 40 initiative. And so this was established under executive order. And again, this is the first time in our nation's history that we've made it a goal, an explicit goal, to deliver benefits to what we're calling disadvantaged communities. And so, again, the Justice 40 initiative, and I want to be really clear with this, is not a new pot of money. It is not a single one-time investment. It is about transforming the monies and the resources that are already within agencies to benefit disadvantaged communities. And so over the last several months, and I encourage you to go to our website, you'll see agencies, our federal agencies, that are releasing programs that, again, are going to be focused on delivering these 40% of benefits to disadvantaged communities. So these benefits, again, are really focused in these categories. So climate change, clean energy, clean transit, affordable, sustainable housing, legacy pollution, clean water and infrastructure, and training and workforce development. So again, part of this Justice 40 is not just transforming the institutions and how they deliver these benefits, but also making sure that there is a robust stakeholder engagement plan so you can help shape. Because part of what I totally agree with is that it's not enough just to get the money out there, but you have to make sure that it makes it from federal to state to those disadvantaged communities. And from experience, I know sometimes the state to local, it can get a little bit shady. So we want to make sure, and we want your input on how we can facilitate that implementation. The next thing that I want to share is the CJIS, or the Climate and Economic Justice Screening Tool. So again, we talked about Justice 40 and 40% of those benefits going to disadvantaged communities. So this tool will help agencies identify those disadvantaged communities. So essentially, back in February of this year, the beta version, or the first draft of the tool, was launched. And we were able to get a lot of feedback, again, from a lot of different folks, tribal nations, the public, and other agencies. And we are working on a version 1.0 of the CJIS tool. But again, the goal is to have a standard way that our agencies can use to identify the communities, again, that we want to focus on through the Justice 40 initiative. So again, I encourage you, if you haven't, to go out. You can Google CJIS and it would come up, or you can get it from our website. The last thing that I want to share with you is the Environmental Justice Scorecard. And this is super personal to me in so many different ways. But again, this was something that was established under executive order. And for many of you, and I know you're probably savvy EJ folks, you've probably created multiple scorecards. I know Siege has, and others, which is basically a way to rank and assess how folks are doing about something. Well, this is the first time that the federal government is taking this on, an environmental justice scorecard that for this first attempt, we'll try and get a baseline assessment of the federal government efforts to really, again, begin to secure environmental justice. And what I want to make sure that you're aware of is that last week we released what we call a RFI, or request for information. And this is an opportunity for the public to provide feedback on what this scorecard should look like, what should be the vision, the framework, the outcomes, et cetera. So I encourage you, and we can make sure that you have the link to give us your thoughts, because that's what we hope will inform the final scorecard that the agencies will be responsible for completing at a certain frequency. The other piece that I think is critically important that I just want you to be aware of, and I'm a firm believer in not just engagement, but education and engagement. So one of the things that, again, that started way before my time, but I've been able to participate in a couple the last month that I've been in this position, are what we call community connections. So, an opportunity for environmental justice leaders and other leaders to come in a small setting, virtual, and share their experiences, share what their needs are, concerns, or what they want the White House to know. And as you see, these community connections have a range of issues and topics that we've been talking about. And again, I think it just, for my staff, keeps us grounded as to why we do this work. And so, again, we will have more opportunities for education and engagement. And if you have ideas about how we can do that better, I encourage you to reach out. And so, again, I just want to, again, remind you of the website that has a lot of this information. But again, and we can stop sharing the slides, Noble, at this point. Thank you so much. Um, I want to acknowledge again that we have a group of dedicated folks at the White House and CEQ. And so I definitely have to acknowledge, again, the work of the team before I got here. I want to acknowledge Chair Brenda Mallory. I want to acknowledge my small but mighty EJ team that will hopefully be growing. And so, again, we just had last week, for example, our White House Environmental Justice Advisory Council, or WEJAC meeting, which is a set of environmental justice leaders that their task is to advise CEQ on how we do this EJ stuff, and to advise the White House Interagency Council on how we do this EJ stuff. So I cannot leave without acknowledging the members of our WEJAC. And last week, and I encourage you again to Google WEJAC and go to the website. At that 2-day meeting virtual last week, the WEJAC offered a set of recommendations around Justice 40 implementation, what I talked about. They offered a set of recommendations around the CGIS tool and incineration. And so all these recommendations were approved, and now it is our job at CEQ to review these recommendations and respond. And so again, I encourage you to join those meetings because there's an opportunity for public comment. And so again, we want to continue to hear from you in ways that make sense. But, again, I just want to acknowledge the WEJAC as well as our Interagency Advisory Council, because CEQ cannot do this work alone. So in summary, what I've shared with you is a super ambitious agenda by this administration. But I want to say that we are committed to progress, and as I say, not perfection, but making progress. And so I do hope that the next couple of days that you spend in this virtual space, and when you come together in person on Saturday, that you really think about your vision for advancing energy, power, and justice, and how you build that. And I hope it becomes clearer to you. And I guess I really believe that all of us working together, we will be able to realize tangible benefits of energy building power in communities, in our institutions, and across this country. So again, thank you for the opportunity and the invitation, Dr. Sacoby, to share a little bit of the space in this, what I know will be an awesome symposium. And I wish everybody wellness and health, and just keep on doing the great work that you're doing. So thanks so much. And I'll turn it back to you, Dr. Sacoby.
Cool. Thank you, Dr. White-Newsome, for that great opening keynote lecture. And I was taking notes about energy. You came up with an acronym. So evolution, folks. We have to evolve. Did y'all hear that? We have to evolve. We have to grow the EJ movement. We have to evolve and transform it too. We have to evolve how we do energy justice work, right? We have to evolve and work together. Nimbleness, right? We got to be more nimble, got to be more agile, got to be able to, things are changing as Dr. White-Newsome said, things are changing. So how climate is changing. So how can we be nimble to be more, not reactionary, but really more proactive? You talked about environmental justice has to be at the core of what we do, right? Has to be core. Addressing environmental injustice. addressing environmental racism, which was coined by Dr. Benjamin Chavis. Remember Dr. Benjamin Chavis at the PCB landfill fight, which day 3 is going to be the 40th anniversary. Remembrance is going to happen on day 3 with Dr. Chavis there, right? EJ, environmental justice, economic justice, right? And it's all connected. You can't talk about climate change and mitigation, adaptation, resilience without talking about environmental justice and dealing with racism, folks. I'm sorry, right? Responsibility. We all have to be responsible to contribute in this movement, from the federal down to the state to the local, as activists and advocates and researchers, right? And others in different sectors. Corporate responsibility, corporate action on climate change and environmental justice. We're going to talk about that too today, right? As a closing session. Generational, right? We have to have a generational mindset. We have to work across generations. We have to be intergenerational, right? We have to work together. She talked about having her younglings, your kids my kids haven't done it yet. I need to get them in front of Congress and talk about these issues. That's great. Young folks, Sunrise Movement, right? Our seniors, our elders, also working together to talk about these issues and not yielding, right? Not going with the status quo, right? Keep moving, keep advancing. And I know you can't take questions today, Doctor White-Newsome, but what I would say is I would do a couple things as a follow and some of the other points that you made. Um, you made a very important point about what CQ is doing and the role of everybody here on this symposium. YouTube, you're out there on YouTube, you're in the stream, you're out there on Facebook. But she talked about the RFI, about the scorecard. So provide comments on that. She talked about the CGIS tool. So that's the tool that's going to be used to map communities, climate environment. This is a screening tool, and trying to update that tool to get version 1.0. So provide feedback, use the tool, see if it's actually working for you. Does it capture your community? Is it getting to the folks that I like to say that should be prioritized, identify the micro targeted resources, right? Also, WEJAC. If you don't know what WEJAC is, the White House Environmental Justice Advisory Council, it's the second ever EJAC. The first EJAC is NEJAC, the National Environmental Justice Advisory Council, right? But that's the WEJAC is the overarching one. So attend those WEJAC meetings, right? And we're going to have several WEJAC members presenting during this symposium. We have a WEJAC member presenting as part of the Hurricane Maria session. We're going to have WEJAC members presenting as part of the Fund the EJ Movement session, Peggy Shepard, Dr. Robert Bullitt, and Dr. Beverly Wright tomorrow. And then we have a few other WEJAC members. And then NEJAC, which is the oldest Environmental Advisory Council, we're going to have a number of NEJAC members, Scott Clow, Jacqueline, current WEJAC member, Jerome Shabazz is a current WEJAC member, and some other current NEJAC members, NEJAC members from the EPA who will be presenting as well. And another thing that Dr. White-Newsome mentioned, is not energy versus power. Is we have the energy is energy and power. How we need the energy to build power, build community power, right? So those are some great highlights. Thank you, Dr. White-Newsome. Really appreciate the getting us ready for the today, tomorrow, and day 3. And again, appreciate the shout out to the center. And again, as I said earlier in my introduction, center wouldn't be here, and the symposium wouldn't be the symposium without the contributions of Dr. White-Newsome, without the contributions of Mustafa Ali 10 years ago, Leslie Fields, and other core folks, Bernice Miller Travis, the icon again, in helping to make this what we do in this state, in this region, the foundation of that work, and making what we do really successful. So thank you again. So I'm gonna give a few more comments before we get transition to our first block of concurrent sessions, everybody. So as I said earlier, if you haven't seen the agenda, you can go to www.siege.org, and you can click on the link that says more information about the symposium, and you will see the agenda is laid out for day 1, day 2, and day 3. And again, our first block of sessions today start at 11:10. We also will have a lunchtime keynote, as I mentioned earlier. Dr. Sharonda Buchanan, who's the interim director of the Office of Environmental Justice and Healthy Human Services, right? So she'll be speaking at lunch, and then we'll again, as I alluded to, have a closing session today on corporate action, corporate responsibility on environmental justice and climate change. That should be another great session. If you haven't had a chance to see the bios yet for all of our speakers, as I said earlier, you can also go to Siege, our Siege website, and download the bios. So I'm hoping everyone has a chance to really look at all the great sessions that we organized for today, organized for tomorrow, and organized for Saturday. Now, our next block of sessions, I said already, starts at 11:10. So what we can do is I'll give y'all some time back. You might have had a chance to eat some food, eat breakfast, hang up the family, run some. No, don't run any errands. You're gonna miss your sessions. So let's go on off air, Noble, and y'all can take a break, and we'll restart with the concurrent sessions at 11:10. Okay, thank you.